My name's Dr. Cate Shanahan, and I'm a family medicine physician. I'm based here in the Denver area now, and I've been doing this paleo game thing for a while, since the early 2000s when I lived in Hawaii and started writing a book. And I currently consult with the Los Angeles Lakers and do some metabolic coaching out of my home office here in the Morrison area. Before I went to medical school, I went to Cornell to study genetics in the 1980s. And but at that point in time, it was all about GMOs. So I was kind of like not excited about it because I thought like GMOs were going to go nowhere because the whole thing was so complicated. We really couldn't control it in a way that seemed like would be important to control. But I guess it wasn't important. But ever since then, I've still followed the research in genetics. And what I'm going to talk about mostly today is the what has been essentially a revolution in DNA sequencing technology that has enabled us to finally gain major insights into the genetics behind autism, and what they say about what we can actually do or not do towards treating and preventing autism. So we're going to cover that today. What is autism? Well, it's a disease that affects your socialization, and it's quite easy to spot. In fact, I'm guessing that most of you will be able to tell me after less than 30 seconds which one of these two children has autism. Let's see if I can get it to start playing. Is it playing? Yes. Okay. So, and you don't even need sound. I turned the sound down. So I guess maybe like we can call out, like, can anyone tell yet? Because it is actually obvious to those who diagnose it. Yeah? Okay. The one with autism is the one on the right or the left? Who says right? Okay. And who says left? Okay. Well, so most of you got it, right? And it's actually the kid on the right. I forgot to ask you, what do you feel when you're looking at these two kids? And it's what I felt was like frustration. Like, why wouldn't that kid, if I put myself in that examiner's position, the examiner's on the right, I would be like, why isn't this kid looking at me? And it's a little bit of frustration. So you actually can feel the diagnosis. And in working with kids with autism, I feel it when they're in the room because I just feel like frustrated. So it's very disruptive, not just for the child, right? It disrupts their entire life, and it also tends to disrupt the family. So no disease is good, but I really hate autism, like maybe the most, because of this, because of what it does to children for their whole lives and to often their whole families. And what I'd like for you to come away with by the end of the talk today is confidence that if you are in the healthcare field, and even if you're not, but even whether you're a doctor, a clinician, or a personal trainer, or an acupuncturist, that you can play an important role in preventing autism in the same way that business coaches play a really important role in helping people get their businesses off the ground by advising them that they need to plan. And they need to plan often for a year. Typically, that's what they say, to get your business off the ground. I've just been through this, and I did it for a year, and it still didn't work out, but that's another story. They say this because it's your best way of giving your business any chance for success. Well, it's the same with children. If you want to give them the best chance of success, you really can help them quite a bit by planning for a year. And I'm going to give you some concrete advice on what to say. So a note on the subtitle here. When I put this talk together, I thought, epigenetics. Does everyone know what epigenetics is versus genetics? So genetics is the study of the DNA code itself, and just like the letters in the code. epigenetics has kind of taken over the field of genetics because it is a term that tries to capture all the many processes that need to occur to turn DNA into a living organism, into a living cell. So it's the regulation of proteins, the turning on and off of proteins in what cell, at what time, and in what amount. So it's a huge, complicated field. But it's cell specific, and it's just like I wasn't thinking about it, that you can't study brain cells very easily, nowhere near as easily as you can study, just getting DNA from a cheek swab or blood test. So we're not going to have, I don't think, epigenetic information that's really meaningful for a long time because we would need to be tissue specific. So today, I'd like to discuss this controversy of whether autism really is increasing or not, show you all the different types of abnormalities found in the brains of children with autism, help you understand that there's a large variety of new DNA mutations. And what do I mean by new DNA mutations? Also, that's a very important concept. I'm going to go over that. And then finally, review some basic ways that should be foolproof in preventing these mutations. So, is it increasing? Well, what's the controversy, right? Like, this looks like, there you go. This is actually from the CDC. Of course it's increasing, but no, it's never as simple as that. So the reason there's controversy is because there's been some diagnostic changes recently in the past 15 years or so that have increased the numbers of children diagnosed. There's been an increased awareness of autism thanks to the web and the diagnostic changes. And there's actually some financial benefits to having the diagnosis of autism. I actually have been pressured many times by parents who have children with cerebral palsy or Down syndrome to throw in a diagnosis of autism so that they can get some funding from their school systems or from their cities. So this kind of thing will just make it harder to track the data accurately. There's been many studies that have tried to erase all those confounding factors, those three other factors. And the favorite one, my favorite one, that I think is the most compelling, does the best job, is this one out of Sweden that shows that actually 60% of the increase is probably due to these confounding factors, but that leaves a massive 40% increase. That's a real increase. So this was in Sweden, and their system is a lot more organized. So that's kind of why I like this article. The factors that they found that were causing that 60% of not real increase that they were able to study were the fact that in 1994, and this happened in the United States as well, the diagnosis of autism was broadened to become a spectrum. And what that means is that now they're including things like Asperger's and pervasive developmental disorder, which were previously separate diagnoses. So now you lump them all together, suddenly more people have autism. Another thing that happened in Sweden, and to some extent, a lesser extent in the United States, they were able to capture data from outpatient settings, not just children who'd been hospitalized for one reason or another. And they were also able, this study, they were able to control for two other things: the improved ability to diagnose children at younger ages, which would make the number of children living with autism go up, as well as increased clinician awareness. So they did some complicated statistical manipulations that would put us all to sleep. But they seem pretty good. We'll just trust their statisticians. They also don't have a funding bias in Denmark the way we do, that I mentioned about the school systems. So that leaves 40% unexplained. So where are we at? What does that leave us with? So here's back to the United States with the prevalence in, according to the CDC, of the percentage and then the numbers of children diagnosed with autism in the United States between the years 2000 and 2014. And we see that it starts at around just over 0.5%, or 166, and ends at just around 2%, or 1 in 50. But when you take away the 50 or the 60%, that would be called maybe overdiagnosis. When you gradually take it away, or I did like a little bit more year by year, sort of just an estimate, that green line, we still have a massive increase in autism. That's a real, issue, and really we need to get to the bottom of this. So 190% is just about a tripling, and that's pretty terrifying given that we're talking about a 14-year period. And so you dial that back, you dial it forward, we're going to presumably see some numbers, that could get scary. And considering that each autistic child is going to cost the social system somewhere around, I think the number I heard was like 10 or 20 million over their lifetime. That's insane if we're talking about, 2%, 3%, if the numbers get higher, of the population of children. So let's start looking at what autism is. So long ago, they were able to identify what are some of the underlying brain disorders before we got to studying genetics, before we got efficient at studying genetics. And they found, wherever they looked, they found something. So when they looked just with the eyeball, by waiting till people with autism would pass away, then they would slice up their brains and look at them look at them with staining, basically, they saw changes. When they put them under the microscope, they saw changes. When they look at the type of cells that are in a certain area of the brain versus like what type of cells should be there, they see switcheroos in abnormal cells and abnormal locations. They also see connections between cells that are abnormal. So as the technology gets more and more sophisticated, we don't have to wait till children die anymore to be able to see differences. But there's just so many things that are wrong with the brain that lead to this disorder. Even like the processing speeds and the large system connections in the brain. So I'm going to go over like a sample of each one of them. This is from the oldest kind of data that we have. It's a postmortem section of a 23-year-old who had been diagnosed with autism, and he died. And they sliced through a part of the brainstem called the cerebellum. And what those little tiny arrows show is two what they call novel tracks that don't exist. They've never seen this in a brain before. And we don't know what they did, but they connect a part of the brain to another part of the body in a way that doesn't exist in any other human being in the world. And what we know about this child from his behavior while he was alive is that he had a very strange love of pain. He engaged in extreme pain-causing things. They had a medical term for that. I forget what it was. Including self-amputation, where he removed a number of his own fingers, and something called anal gouging, which I didn't know what it was. I had to look it up on Butt Buddies, and found out that it had something to do with hammers and the other end of the hammer. But probably you don't need a hammer. There's probably multiple ways to accomplish that. So there's a technical term. Doctors are ready for whatever you do. We have a term for it. So another thing that they find is patchy cortical layering deficits. So every part of the brain, the gray matter, is supposed to have a number of layers, and these layers are essential for proper processing of information. It's a hierarchical processing system, and it enables really complex information to be synthesized really quickly, and some of the most cutting-edge computer people are trying to copy this so that they can make computers that have 1,000 or 1,000,000 times the processing capability. But you see in children with autism that there are many their brains kind of have these pockmarks over them like a golf ball, where they don't have this. And what this could mean is that processing is not occurring properly in large areas of the brain. And perhaps this is an explanation for one of the phenomena that children with autism have to suffer with, which one of them did, because many children have very many different experiences when they're autistic. But one who had good enough language skills was able to describe that when she looks at a person's face, she doesn't just see their face in real time. She sees multiple images almost superimposed of previous facial expressions that person has used. So it's like an overwhelming experience almost. And this is one reason that she didn't like making eye contact. So maybe it's related to this. I don't know. But this is, clearly is not a good thing. And then another thing that they're able to find is reduced connectivity between the cerebellum, which is the area of the brain that makes motions automatic. So when you tie your shoes and don't have to think about it, that's thanks to our cerebellum. So if you look at the little green balls and the top one on the bottom one has a lot more red streaks coming out of it. So that's connectivity. I'm sorry, the bottom one has less red streaks. So they have less connections from the cerebellum to other parts of the brain. And maybe that is why some of the children who have autism have very jerky, chunky motions, and it's very hard for them to do things like write. Sometimes they end up typing better, or walking is often very delayed, maybe because of this. They also have an unpredictable way of connecting parts of the brain. There's parts that are regionally overconnected and regionally underconnected. And it tends to be that the large brain connections from one distant part to another are underconnected and the close ones are overconnected. And so you might expect that this could increase like very specific visual processing skills. For example, making it possible for Rain Man to count all those toothpicks when they fell in the movie that came out in the 1990s, if anybody saw that. So like when there's over connections in small areas, they do give you this ability, but still you're without the longer connections. So there's other abilities that come at cost of those abilities. And then there's a huge inter-individual variability in sensory responses. So what this slide is showing is that they tested children with and without autism. They gave them vibration to their 2 fingertips, and then they measured the area of the brain that responded to that vibration. So pretty simple. It's not something you think about. It's an automatic thing, and they just could do an EEG. And what the typically developing slide shows is that variability is less, and that children with ASD have more variability, because the brighter the colors means that there's more variability occurring. So if there was no color on the typically developing, they'd be completely identical. There's a little bit of color, but there's a lot more. So children with autism process basic sensory information in wildly different, relatively speaking, areas of their brain. So their brains are so different. And then finally, there's the 3 major brain circuits that they were able to study with this study, being the limbic, shown in red, which is like the mood, the happiness, sadness, things that make you happy, your dopamine reward is thanks to the limbic system. The social communication and understanding of social connections is shown in blue, and the I forget what that green thing. Visual like responses are shown in the green there. And so what the top versus the bottom data is showing that in typically developing children, see all the colors superimpose. So all that processing has happened at this exact same time. So things happen, really quickly in terms of the connection between those 3 brain regions, whereas there's a delay in the children with autism spectrum, particularly in the limbic, mood, affective. So they're thinking things, but they just don't have the reaction. They don't get that emotional like boost. Like, for example, when people smile at them, maybe like we get a little bit of happy juice when somebody smiles at us, or when we look at a picture of somebody smiling. But if you have autism, this would not happen at the exact same time that it's supposed to happen. So the reinforcement may never develop. So you don't get to experience just like joy of communication in the same way that everyone else does. So what all of this means to me is that autistic children, every autistic child is basically uniquely unique. It's not just a disease that people have to suffer with. They have to suffer alone because they are uniquely affected. Almost everyone's brain is different. And I just wanted to kind of introduce a little bit more of how the diagnosis is made and what happens. when a child has autism, and what happens if you're a parent and your child has autism. What's it going to be like? So I'm going to play this where you can hear what the person is saying. I think. Oh, I guess not. There's no audio. So basically what she's saying is that this kid is like exploring the toy, and he just is fascinated with the toy, and he never looks at the interviewer. He does some funny repetitive motions. If you saw him like with the arms, so repetitive motions, they call it self-stim, but I'm not really sure if that's what the researchers really think are all agreeing on that. So that kind of stuff, that's something that you see a lot more in children with autism. And no matter what, he just like he doesn't understand that this woman is trying to help him. The toy stops working. It's a little wind-up toy, so he gets all upset. And he doesn't see her as a source of help, and he never ever looks at her, like, ever. So, I mean, if you were a parent and you were working with this child and they never looked at you, there's something called attachment bonding, which can happen at day 1, but is usually starting to happen by 2 months. And it's just that conjugate gaze where your baby's looking in your eyes, right? And it's like an enrapturement. And not to quote Game of Thrones again, but there was a line in there when the Khaleesi's learning how to be a proper lover. To her call, the person who's training her, it says, "Love comes in through the eyes, Khaleesi." And it's true. The latest autism research shows it. So... And then I also just wanted to show you, like, this is what normal is. And so this child doesn't have autism, but, like, look how much more fun she's having. And how fun would it be to give a child like this a toy and see that they are enjoying it? And they share their enjoyment with the mother. That's what she's trying to do there when she turns around, is share how it's like, look at this, what I got here, Mom. And it's all social. Like, she can't go 3 seconds without looking at somebody to see, what's up. And then she realizes that this person is a source of help, and her request for assistance is effective, instead of, crying and fussing and being sad. So she gets what she wants. So it's a much less frustrating experience as a child as well. You can get what you want when you want it. And she doesn't even know how she did that. She's only, these are 14-month-old children. So, so far I've talked about the gross growth anomalies at the cellular level that are associated with autism. And, everywhere you look, you find some. But what's underlying these? So we have all different kinds of ideas. We've had all different kinds of ideas for a long time. And I only put that first one up there just to show how far we've come. When I was in medical school, we actually still use that term, refrigerator mother, referring to a cold mother who didn't bond properly with her child and was the cause of schizophrenia and autism at the time. And then, of course, lots of toxins have been looked at. Malnutrition isn't something that, you see a lot of research about, but I believe it's an important cause, so I put it down. And epigenetic factors, which are complicated to study, and then genetic factors. So I'm going to be focusing on those genetic factors. And whoops, did that go too fast? Particularly, where's my fancy slide action? The toxins. Infections and immune system malfunction do also play a role in damaging DNA, but that would also, that would be in utero or prenatal. The kind of DNA damage that I'm going to be talking about. And the kind of DNA damage I'm going to be talking about is just your straight up mutation. So it's a change in the letter code. So just to briefly review what is DNA and what are those letters we're all talking about. DNA is a super long molecule that has, all of the DNA in each one of your cells has all the information required to build another you if we were able to clone people. And there's different ways that there's different mutations that can occur. And so they've grouped them according to size, and this is an artifact of the technology used to find these mutations. They actually need different types of mathematics and sequencing data and stuff like this to be able to find these different kinds of mutations. So one base pair Substitution is like what we used to think of as a mutation. It's just one letter changes, and that's your mutation. And but we call it a base pair because it's never just one nucleotide changing. If you change, say, that yellow adenine there on the right, adenine only binds to thymidine. So that means when the DNA replicates or you make RNA out of it, you get a thymidine there. So it turns out that many children with autism have DNA mutations that neither parent had. And this to me was shocking, because what we used to think was, we knew autism was genetic or had a genetic cause, but we assumed it was from one parent with an unlucky gene meeting another parent with an unlucky gene and having a baby that ended up having autism. But that's not the case. So it also turns out that they don't just have one mutation. They have 10 times the number of mutations of what the background normal rate is in their family. So 10 times the number compared to their siblings. And one of the things that I think is essential into understanding what we can do about autism is based on this reality, right? So the researchers right now are focusing on finding the genes. And so what they're saying is, yes, we've found lots of genes that are involved in autism using all this latest new sequencing technology. And we found that there are somewhere between 500 and 1,000 genes that you can have mutations in of all different kinds that will cause autism. And what they're not really emphasizing that loudly, and I think is really the key here, is that children with autism have 10 times more mutations than normal. Why? What's going on there? So here's the references for that. And I was just going to go over like how that occurs, but I guess I don't have time since I got the 5-minute thing. So we can actually skip through this. And I'm going to show you real quick what we've seen as an example. So this is an example of one kind of mutation that you can have that leads to autism, one of the 1,000. You can get a shorter than abnormal gene. This, if this is a gene that affects, a shorter than abnormal protein. And so most of the abnormal proteins that occur that cause autism affect the synapses, which are the area in the brain where you have connections between brain cells. And in this case, they found that there's something called SHANK3 that can mutate in 3 different ways. And when it does, the synapse numbers are way lower than they are supposed to be. So there's a normal cell on top, and there's 3 different mutations that cause different kinds of synaptic abnormalities. But here's the real key. Can we prevent de novo mutations? Well, we're not going to prevent all of them, because slow rates of mutation are what drives evolution. But the fact that children with autism have more suggests that there's something going on now that's definitely different in these children. And it's not just children with autism. Children with most brain disorders have been found to have an extra burden of mutations. So whether it's schizophrenia or bipolar, many diseases are similar to this. But autism has been the most well studied in this area. But so if we're talking about new mutations, it's not, we already know one very important step to take. It's really so obvious that there's only one way to put it. The moon is no egg, Khaleesi. The moon is goddess. It is known. So, and this is what it is, okay? So avoiding carcinogens helps to prevent cancer, because most cancers involve the earliest step is a mutation in the genetic code inside a cell. Now, the difference here is that the difference between autism and cancer, obviously the outcome is different, but the fundamental difference is where and when that mutation happens. So in a cancer cell, the mutation occurs in a single cell in any tissue at any point in the person's life after they're born, usually. And in autism, it occurs in the germ cells before the child is conceived, presumably, so that it affects every single cell. And as we're going to go over if I have time briefly, so autism is not just a brain disorder because it affects every single cell. But these mutations are present in the child when they are born. So if we can avoid these carcinogenic compounds that are mutating our genes, called mutagenic carcinogens, presumably we can avoid a lot of autism. So what are they? Well, I better tell you that, or you're not going to be able to do my thing I want you to do, which is tell people how to avoid them. So there's a lot of things that we've known cause cancer. But if you had a salad today, you may not know that there was a carcinogen in your dressing if you got it from a restaurant. Can anybody guess what I'm talking about is in that salad? PUFAs, vegetable oil. Very good. Because when you put that salad, when you process that oil, you create these byproducts. And these three things are so carcinogenic and mutagenic that entire journals have been devoted to them in their study. So if we can get people to simply understand to avoid salad dressing, and the worst of the worst is when you go out to eat your fried food, and when you're at home, your snack chips and your salad dressing, right? You have to make salad dressing. Just those three changes will take down the level of consumption of vegetable oil, which is not insignificant. The average American consumes 60% of their calories every day from vegetable oil based on food disappearance data. And the stuff's in everything. It's in cereal. It's in like every processed food, and people who live on processed food are just getting tons and tons of it. Or people who go out to eat, because it's in many, 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 many restaurant foods as well. So I'm so sorry. I've sort of burned through my time, but I got through all the points that I really wanted to get through. And I think if anybody has questions, I don't know if I still have 10 minutes for questions. Oh, great. Okay. So do you guys have burning questions, or do you want to see the rest of my slides? Okay, thanks. Great. So why is it? I do go over this in our book, Deep Nutrition, but I didn't have this picture. Actually, we're re-releasing the book, Deep Nutrition, in December with Macmillan Flatiron. So please be sure to take a look at it and consider buying it. The reason that PUFAs do not stand up well to processing and are so oxidizable and potentially toxic all comes from the fact that they have two double bonds in close proximity there. Those two double bonds in close proximity occur in all PUFAs, because PUFA stands for polyunsaturated. And so unsaturated just means there's one double bond because it's not saturated with hydrogens. And so if you have monounsaturated olive oil, you only have one double bond. Any double bond is susceptible to attack by oxygen, and that's what mutates these things. That's what causes oxidative stress. That's what creates all the toxins, is oxygen attacks double bonds. But one double bond is not very easy to attack. When there's two in a row, just for chemical reasons, it's really hard to protect. And that's why in nature, things where these oils are produced, like seeds, they're surrounded by antioxidants. So soybeans and sunflowers that are source of PUFA oils, when we eat them whole, they're surrounded with all these antioxidants. So when they're fresh and whole and unprocessed and uncooked, all those antioxidants protect the PUFAs in the seed, and they will protect the PUFAs in your body as well, so that they're not bad for you unless they have been extracted. So when there's two double bonds, it's easy to attack them. When there's three, it's even easier. So this is one of the reasons that I think we find very conflicting data on omega-3 studies, because it really depends on how fresh that omega-3 is, because studies have shown that it only lasts about 15 to 30 days before you have what the researchers call unacceptable levels of those three bad compounds that I showed up earlier, which are so bad and so toxic and so mutagenic that entire journal articles have been devoted to discussing them. So here's where the chemistry happens. Here's the explanation of why are those 2 and 3 double bonds bad? Definitely you want to go home and study this. But I'm only half joking, because if you understand this, you will understand what's really causing arteriosclerosis, what's really causing Alzheimer's disease, because these things are in our membranes, and when they oxidize in the brain, we get more beta amyloid. So there's just a lot to be gained from studying this stuff if you have the stomach for it. But the bottom line is how do you avoid it? You avoid it by avoiding vegetable oils like the poisons that they are. I would equate like a French fry or a potato chip to smoking a pack of cigarettes when you're pregnant. So, and I like to convey that to people when they're pregnant or thinking about becoming pregnant, so that they can think about not just quitting smoking or not smoking, but also what are they going to do to get their fix of French fries or potato chips or whatever it is. Because, you know, it seems like an extreme thing to say, but these things are really bad because they live with you and they get into every part of your body. They get into your brain and they get into your ovaries and they just get everywhere and cause problems wherever they are. So the reason that they're bad is not because nature makes bad fats. Nature doesn't make bad fats. Factories do. And what happens in the factory is that they do a lot of stuff to get as much oil as possible out. And then after they do all that stuff, heat, pressure, even if they don't use heat or solvents, even if it is organic and expeller pressed or cold pressed, it is still refined. And this is a question I get all the time. Is canola okay if it's expeller pressed? No, because it's the refining process that does most of the damage. It's got bleaching agents in there and it just does a bunch of bad stuff. So this is a slide that shows that the point I was making earlier, that autism is not just a brain disease. It's a disease that affects nerves everywhere in the body. And so this one particular gene mutation that has been shown to cause autism in 80% of the children that have it, so it's not 100% penetrance, and a lot of genetic disorders are like that. 73% of the children have severe gastrointestinal disturbances involving like 6-week bouts of diarrhea that come and go, and that seem to, fortunately, thank goodness, disappear at puberty. Not likely to be related to food allergies. And 67% of them have bizarre sleep disturbances where they just don't sleep for days in a row, and then they'll go back and they'll sleep for days in a row, to the point that parents have to literally lock their children in a room when they're young because they can't be awake themselves for days in a row to keep them safe. So it's really life disrupting. And one of the last points I want to make is that we talk a lot about prenatal care and preconception planning for women and what women should eat, but what I haven't really mentioned is that many of these studies have shown that there's a huge increase in the number of children with autism when men are older. They have a double the mutation rate actually in their sperm. Just if you go from age 15 to age 30, you have twice as many mutations in your sperm. And if you believe that the mutagens affect your DNA, then what this means is that if you go into McDonald's for your 21st birthday and you load up on fries and onion rings and all that stuff, you have essentially aged your gonads there much more rapidly than if you instead had like an antioxidant rich salad and a really healthy meal. So I think men and women both should be encouraged to eat well for a year before they get pregnant. And so did the Dothraki, because do you remember when she ate the horse heart? She was pregnant early on, right? It was like something to do to make sure that you're going to have a boy who's going to mount a stallion who mounts the world or something like that. So this is the advice, and if you can get people to do this for a year, I truly believe we will be able to cut down autism by that 30 to 45%, because we will drastically be reducing the rates of spontaneous mutations that are relatively easy to control, right? I mean, we know how to avoid smoking, we know how to avoid alcohol, we know, but that there's things that we really can't avoid, if you have bad air quality where you live, if you have to drink water and your water supply isn't that great, there's a lot that we can't avoid. But this vegetable oil thing, because it constitutes up to 60% of many people's diets, will get them, that one piece of advice will get them so far that I believe we'll really see amazing results if we can actually get people to do it. And it's not hard. It's not like quitting smoking, because butter tastes better than margarine anyway. And it's not like there isn't a substitute. There are natural fats. It's just that they're more expensive, and that's a different issue, and you have to often avoid processed food, and that's another issue. But those are things everybody agrees on anyway. So this is just one more fantastic thing that I think that, people have different susceptibility points in their lives when they will listen to somebody telling them they ought to change their diet. And so here's yet another one that I think is super powerful, because so many women are like, what can I do for my baby? I want to have a healthy baby. And even if it's not a year ahead, once they're already pregnant, it's still going to make a difference in the way their child grows, even if their DNA has already got whatever damage it's going to have. The other 50% is growth. And so that, of course, is beyond the scope of this talk. But I believe another huge opportunity for us to improve the lives of everyone who will listen to us, give them diet advice. So thanks. So I'll hang around for a few minutes for questions.